Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion about what happened in the episode before we rank each episode against each other. Today's episode is One Piece East Blue Saga Baratie Arc, Episode 20, The Famous Cook, Sanji at the Floating Restaurant. The episode, in a nutshell, is just a brief summary of what happened within the episode. So once Zoro and Johnny recognize each other, Johnny then brings Yusaku onto the boat, the Going Merry, and basically he explains how Yusaku has fallen sick on their journey and he is dying. And as they were, resting on this tiny little reef, a cannonball from the Going Merry smashed the rocks, making it fall on them, on his already sick partner, and that is why he is so angry. And of course, this shocks and appalls Luffy and Usopp, as they had no intentions of doing so and did not know that they were there. And they, of course, apologize. And Johnny is like, that's not enough. But then Nami comes along to save the day and basically says he has scurvy. Get him some limes. He'll be fine in a few days. It's due to a deficiency in, the citrus, like vitamin C, I think it is, that causes scurvy. So Usopp and Luffy rush to get the limes, start squeezing it into Yasuku's mouth, and then he revives. They introduce themselves, and Johnny apologizes for screwing up the ship. Meanwhile, then they kind of talk, and having been awakened to this new concept of needing a variety of nutrients whilst on a sea journey, which literally only Nami knew, even though it was supposed to be common knowledge, they decide that they need a cook before they go to the Grand Line officially. And Johnny says, if you need a cook, go north-northeast. There is a place where you will find seafaring cooks, and you can find one that might go to your crew. So they head in that direction. As they're pulling up near it, they come alongside a marine ship, which has a Lieutenant Iron Fist full body on it, who is taking his date, Moody, to the restaurant, which he has a reservation at. And he basically comes across them and is like, you're a pirate ship, name your captain. And both Luffy and Usopp introduce themselves. Luffy then says that they had just painted their flag yesterday, and Usopp lets him know that he was the one who painted it. Full Body kind of stops taking them seriously at that point, like they're children playing pirates, and goes to his subordinate and basically tells his subordinate that they're an eyesore, sink 'em. They shoot a cannon at the Going Merry. Luffy catches it and is going to slingshot it back, but he loses his grip on Merry's head. The front piece, I've forgotten what it is called. The figurehead, that's what it's called. He loses his grip on the figurehead and ends up slingshotting the cannon right into the restaurant, specifically into Zeph's room. And so then Full Body and Moody, they head into the restaurant, and Luffy is dragged to Zeph's room to basically take responsibility for having destroyed part of the restaurant and bruising his head. At first, he sees that Zeph is missing a leg and becomes very upset that he might have been the one who got rid of the leg, but actually it was a head wound that Zeph got from some of the falling debris in his room. And Luffy reveals he has no money to pay him back for the damages to the restaurant, so Zeph tells him that he will work for a year unpaid and at the restaurant. And Luffy says he's waited patiently for 10 years to become a pirate, so he doesn't want to stay for a year. He offers 1 week, then increases it to 2 weeks maximum. And then after some back and forth, he tells Zeph that he is going to get him to let him leave within 1 week. That's what he's decided. And Zeph basically doesn't believe him, but has basically said that you have to work for me to pay it back since you don't have money to pay for the damages. Inside the restaurant, we have Full Body on his date, and Sanji then comes over and brings them their dinner and their wine. And Full Body tries to impress his date by naming the wine, which he had reserved when he made his reservation. He had told the waiter who made his reservation that he wanted a specific wine. However, all the waiters are revealed to have run off the day before. So now it's sous chef Sanji, and he had just brought a different wine, which embarrasses Full Body. Full Body then decides to cause a scene, and he sees a bug on the ground, and he subtly like squashes it and then puts it in the soup and calls Sanji over to basically say, "Hey, there's a bug in my soup." And Sanji's like, "I don't know what kind of bug that is, but it wasn't in the soup when I brought it." And basically, because he has a thing with food, which will be explained in the future, he does not accept the wasting of food, and he beats up Full Body. And meanwhile, Johnny and Izuku are working to fix the Going Merry, which they had damaged. Meanwhile, Zoro, Usopp, and Nami enter the restaurant, and they enter just as Full Body has been beaten up. And this is where we end this episode. So now that we've summarized what happened, it's now time to rank the episode. As always on this channel, we're going to rank on two lists, a mostly objective ranking, which uses set values to determine the score, and then the personal ranking, which is scored based on my opinion towards the episode. So for our mostly objective rank values, I highlighted those I felt applied, and we'll start with the lowest of the positives, and that is the single arc supporting character introduction of Moody, who is Full Body's date, and she is the single arc supporting character introduction, as I believe she is only in this episode, maybe the next one, but she doesn't appear outside of this arc, so that is worth 1 point. We then have our single arc main character introduction, which is Zeph. He is a main character within this arc. That's why he's as this place, but then he does cameo and appear in flashbacks in future arcs as well. So he does appear in multi-arcs, but at that point he's reduced to a supporting character. This is the arc where he is a main character in this arc, and that is why he is worth the 2 points. We then have our multi-arc supporting character introductions, which is Yosaku, who is Johnny's partner, which we didn't see in the last episode, but this episode, and he was suffering from scurvy. And then we have Iron Fist Full Body, and he appears briefly in this arc, and then he does appear because he is a Marine, and Marines often recur. He does recur in future arcs as well as a supporting character, but he is never a main character, at least as far as I've seen in the series, and I have watched up to the Wano arc, but I haven't watched the Wano arc yet. So at least up until that point, he was not a main character at any point. So multi-arc supporting character, and both of them are therefore worth 3 points each, bringing us to 9 so far. We then have our multi-arc main character introduction, which is Sanji, who is a member of the main crew of the Straw Hats. And that, of course, is worth the 4 points. We then have our multi-arc main character development, which is what happens to Luffy. Obviously, he redirects the cannonball, and this causes damage to the restaurant, and he is basically pressed into indentured servitude as an unpaid laborer until he can pay off with his labor the damages that he did to the restaurant and the injury costs to Zeph, who has a minor head wound as a result. And that is also worth 4 points, which Then brings us to our final positive points, which is another 4 points for the world building, and this, of course, is the introduction of the floating restaurant Barete, where Sanji works, that Zeph owns, and where this arc takes place. Additionally, we learn that scurvy exists within the One Piece world, just as it does within our world, and works the same way. So, that second one was more of an honorable mention. But either way, that brings us to 21 positive points for the episode so far. And so we do have our negative points. They won't impact the score, but they are still worth the mention. So the first negative point, of course, is the negative messaging or behavior, which obviously has to do with full body. He is not reacting well to being embarrassed. And the embarrassment, to be fair, he did call ahead and make a reservation and he requested a specific wine, expecting that to be the wine so that he could impress his date, which I feel like is something that people would do. So I don't really see a problem with that whole thing. And he was needlessly embarrassed because had they just checked the reservation or showed any sort of care to their customers rather than only care to their food, like the entire situation could have been avoided very easily. But what I would consider the negative messaging or behavior really has to do with putting the bug in the soup. Faking that there was a bug in the soup to ruin the reputation of the restaurant and potentially the chefs, the cooks, impact their business, their livelihood, all because you were a little bit embarrassed once. Completely unacceptable and childish and petty behavior. We don't condone it. That is why it is a negative messaging or behavior, because he faked an issue to the dish that would have then had negative impacts not just on Sanji, who he was upset with, but the restaurant as a whole, the business, livelihood, etc., as I said. And that is worth -2 points. I believe I said that too. And then the other one, of course, is that I did feel like the full body subplot was weaker. Like, I understand that in order to make sure that Luffy and group are there for the events that are going to occur within the arc, that is why I believe they had full body there to, like, full body basically shoots a cannon that causes the damage to the restaurant, which then leaves Luffy having to work at the restaurant to pay the damages. And then you had the second aspect where he then offends Sanji, who honestly was kind of rude to him first, but then does the whole bug in the soup thing, then wastes the soup because it has a bug in it that he put in it. Sanji goes over how hard he worked on the soup and then beats him up, which, to be fair, under negative messaging or behavior, we can honorably mention the fact that you should not beat up your customers, even when they are doing things that are just objectively bad. I'll put that as an honorable mention aside. But at the same time, I also feel like he didn't necessarily need to be there because Luffy and crew were going to Barete anyways to find a chef. So they would have gone there, they would have been looking for a chef, trying to win over a chef. When the other events happened, they still would have been there. Luffy likely still would have seen Sanji's. I don't want to give too many spoilers for future episodes. So basically, would still probably have grown attached to Sanji, and then they would want him on the crew and so on and so forth. Like, I feel like the events would still maybe have happened the way that they did without him being forced into labor because of the damages to the restaurant. So there's that aspect. Also, with the weaker subplot, again, we introduced Sanji, but literally he could have been introduced through any customers. It didn't necessarily have to be full body. So he could even have been introduced as the one serving the group of the Straw Hats. Like, I feel like both of the events that he kind of was the catalyst to could also still have happened and allowed for the rest of the events of the arc to occur without him being there. Doesn't mean I don't like the way they did it, but I just felt like it was ultimately not necessarily necessary to the plot, as the plot still probably could have continued and come to its conclusion without him ever being there, or his like plot points ever being there. That's why I think it's weak, and that's why I think it's worth a -2 points as well. Which brings us then all the way to 17 points. The maximum an episode can score is 10, so this is our second 10 out of 10 episode. So for our arc ranking so far in our mostly objective ranking, this episode is our second 10 out of 10, making the order Past of the Three Swords, The Promise Between Zoro and Kuina, and then this episode in second, The Famous Cook, Sanji of the Floating Restaurant, and of course, when the mostly objective ranking list has two episodes with the same score, they are then ranked in episode order, which is why this one is second. Alright, so now for my personal opinion on the episode. I like these little slice of life episodes because they often have a lot of comedy in them. And there were some moments of comedy within this episode as well. There was with the limes when Luffy and Usopp go to get them, they basically try to go through the door at the same time and end up stuck for a little bit until they finally like push through. Then when they're putting the limes on, they're like just constantly putting like so many limes, squeezing the juice all over Yosaku's face and then like shoving the rinds or like the skins that are left over into his mouth, and then he like wakes up and then he's got like a second wind, but then he promptly falls over again because he can't be cured that fast from scurvy. We then have the funny moment where, oh my gosh, I just lost my thought. That's so weird. 1 second. Right. Next funny moment was, of course, when Full Body's asking who the captain is, and both Usopp and Luffy are giving their names, and then he's like, then they just volunteer the fact that they just made the flag yesterday to like show that they were pirates. And then of course the entire interaction between Luffy and Zeth going back and forth, negotiating the time he needs to work for him was also entertaining. It wasn't like laugh out loud funny, but it was entertaining and engaging and fun to watch. But that was also mitigated by some of the more negative behaviors, like the Full Body clearly shows that he does not think Luffy and Usopp and like that crew is serious about being pirates. Like literally as soon as they finish talking, he just gets this look on his face like, right, I don't need to worry about these people. They're children playing. Like it's just obvious that's what he thinks. Yet he's still willing to sink the ship, which is just rude. Then of course, the whole putting the bug in the soup, but also the restaurant disregarding the reservation instructions and requests for a specific wine, and the whole beating up of a customer, not great. So as much as it did have some nice slice of life moments, it was funny. We did get introduced to Johnny and Yosaku, who appear in this arc and also have a big role to play in the next arc as well. Well, not a big role, they're supporting characters through and through, but are also present for the next arc. I also like that they are connected to Zoro's past, and we learn like they worked together as bounty hunters in the past before, when Zoro was a bounty hunter. So overall, like I feel like it was a strong episode, but there was still some parts of it that were just not as entertaining. And compared to the last episode, I do think this one is slightly worse. And that is also part of how I ranked it. So I decided this episode would be a 7 out of 10, putting it into second place. So our personal ranking is first place, Past of the Three Swords, The Promise Between Zoro and Kuna, and then this episode, The Famous Cook, Sanji of the Floating Restaurant. Oh, I also want to point out that this is Sanji's introduction episode where we first see him, and honestly, his role in it is relatively minor, which if the episode is named The Famous Cook, Sanji of the Floating Restaurant, yet, I mean, he has his moment in it, but overall, he comes in the second half and not necessarily a big role in this particular episode. So that was also a bit disappointing for his introduction. Still 7 out of 10 though. So on our saga ranking so far, where we're ranking each of the arcs within the saga against each other, we have our mostly objective ranking, and in first place we have the Romance Dawn arc at 86.67%, the Orangetown arc at 76%, Spirit Village arc is in third at 64% and still pending its official rating. We have the Beretti arc, which has gotten 20 out of 120 so far, so full marks, congrats. Anywho, personal ranking, we had the Orangetown arc in first place at 74%. The Romance Dawn arc came in second at 66.67%. Spirit Village arc is also third place on the personal list at 49%. And Ready Arc pending rating is at currently 15 out of 120 points. This now brings us to our final segment of the video, which is of course our series ranking so far. In the series ranking, we rank each saga against each other, and so far in the East Blue saga, on our mostly objective ranking, we have a score of 20 out of 80, and then on our personal side, the East Blue saga has scored a total of 12 points out of 80 so far. With that, we have now rewatched and ranked One Piece East Blue Saga Baratie Arc, Episode 20, The Famous Cook, Sanji of the Floating Restaurant. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.